Good morning. So I have a really interesting conversation that I want to have with you today. So in this week's Torah portion, we hit the second half of the book of Bereshit, the second half of the book of Genesis. And all of the sudden, everyone starts dreaming. Jacob has two dreams. Joseph has two dreams. Pharaoh has dreams. The butler, the baker. My gosh, it went from practical reality to dreaming. And Pharaoh himself is dreaming. I have a dream. And now, if you want to sum up the second half of Genesis, everyone is dreaming about something. Joseph is in prison. He was placed there on false charges of rape. The, the Torah's account is that he's innocent. It was his accuser who was guilty of seduction, attempted coercion. Nothing ever happened. Joseph was blamed. He's cast into an Egyptian underground prison. In prison, he services the king's butler and baker, who have also been imprisoned. One morning, they share with him their dreams. So the chief cupbearer related his dream to Joseph, and he says, in a dream, behold, a vine is before me, and on the vine there are three, I think they're called tendrils, and it seemed to be blossoming, and the buds came out, and its clusters ripened into grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes and I squeezed them into Pharaoh's cups, and I placed the cup into Pharaoh's palm. And Joseph turns to him and says, this is its meaning. The three tendrils are 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will number you. He will restore you to your position, and you will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand once again, according to your previous custom when you were his cupbearer. The baker is so excited because it's a beautiful interpretation. So he says, I have a dream. I want to present my dream. Me too. In a dream, there were 3 wicker baskets on my head. And in the topmost basket, there were all kinds of Pharaoh's food, a baker's work. And the birds were eating them from the basket atop my head. And then Joseph continues to interpret the baker's dream. He says, this is its meaning. The 3 baskets represent 3 days. In another 3 days, Pharaoh will remove your head from you and hang you on the gallows, and the birds will eat your flesh. Now, you already know that I'm going to try to turn this on its head. There is an obvious difficulty in this story. Now, considering all the similarities in their prospective dreams, the clusters of grapes, the 3 baskets of baked goods, the specialties, wine, pastries, their very self-presence. Why does Joseph interpret these dreams in radically different and opposite ways? When the butler dreams of seeing grapes, and he dreams of himself squeezing the grapes into Pharaoh's goblet and placing it in the king's hand, Joseph sees this in the most literal sense. You will once again prepare wine for the king and you'll deliver it to him. It's obvious. And then, if that's so obvious, then why then, when the baker dreams of holding baskets on his head with Pharaoh's pastries, does Joseph not see it in the same way? The baker's back on his job, preparing bread for Pharaoh, carrying them to the king. The birds are snacking on the way. Why all of a sudden this horrific horror story? And I have another question that's bothering me. While the dream of the butler is explained literally, the dream of the baker becomes symbolic. The birds eating the breads in the basket doesn't mean that they're going to eat the bread. It means they're going to eat the flesh hung by Pharaoh. Symbolism. Why? Why doesn't he just say that the birds will eat from the actual bread that the baker prepared for Pharaoh? There's a very famous 18th century Ukrainian storyteller and preacher, a great rabbi. His name was Rabbi Jacob Kranz. They called him the Dubner Maggid. The Dubner Maggid had a story for everything. He literally had a story for everything. There's a story about somebody asking him, how do you have a story for everything? And he told a story about that. And that's how much he had a story for everything. So he tells a story that a talented artist could paint a picture with such realism that it seemed at times impossible to distinguish it from actual life. Once he drew a scene that portrayed a man standing in an open field with a food basket on top of his head. The painting was so authentic. It seemed so real. The actual birds were swooping down to try to eat the bread in the painting. He presented it to the king, who, so proud of his new acquisition, offered a handsome sum for the one who could find any fault in the painting. Many challengers came. No one was successful in finding a single flaw in this incredible painting. It was a flawless painting. It was perfect. Until an old man approached the painting, observing the phenomena of the birds trying to eat the bread, pictured atop the head of the man portrayed in the painting. He realized that he had discovered a serious problem with its realism. And he pointed it out to the king. And the king gave him his son. And he walked away. What did the old man say? He said, if the birds are trying to eat the bread on top of the man's head, there's something wrong with the man. Because if the birds would perceive the man as true to life, they would be afraid to approach. Birds would never approach a living person with a basket on their head. So the painting is portraying a contradiction which is unreal. Either the person in the painting is alive and the birds stay away, or the man is dead and the birds enjoy the feast on his head. And this was Joseph's tip-off. In the butler's dream, the butler himself served Pharaoh. In the baker's dream, he was passive, while the birds swooped down. And this must have meant that he was not among the living. Passive, active, two very different dreams. Think about it this way. Joseph, by observing one striking difference between the dreams. In the butler's dream, he was active. He was actively squeezing the grapes and serving wine to Pharaoh. He was doing something. In the baker's dream, the baker remains completely passive throughout the entire dream. Things happen to him, not through him. He has 3 baskets of bread in his head. He doesn't place them there. They're just found on top of him. The birds are eating the pastries. He's not doing anything. He's just observing what the birds are doing to him. And this is the difference, in my humble opinion, between life and the opposite of life. And that's why each of their dreams represented their fate. One of them pictured himself as a helpless victim, a victim of external circumstances. The birds swoop down and take at will while he remains a non-entity in his own life, in his own circumstance. He's simply observing things happening to him. The other sees himself as a player and a doer. Joseph knew that one dream represents life and the other represents death. If I can be so bold to say this, I think this distinction exists within each of our lives. I think, I think, maybe you'll tell me what you think, that Joseph's message speaks to each of us. There are three types of people: those who make things happen, those who watch things happen, and those you have to tell that something happened. We're all imprisoned in one way or another. We have to face forces that hold us back, that hold us down. Each of us has our shackles, so to speak, our internal emotions, our external circumstances, things that limit us. The question is not whether we are in prison, because we're all in some form of prison. The bigger question is, are we doing something about it? Or are we waiting for things to happen to us? The sign of life is action. Do something, make a move, create some change, reach out. Don't just go to sleep. Action is the path to freedom. Inaction becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. A great Rebbe once said, one act is superior to 100 sighs. It's true in our personal, in our collective lives, that we often hear about the crisis of Jewish continuity, the various maladies that plague our communities. There's no shortage. Terror that's engulfing the world. We read reports, predictions, and we sigh. Constantly sighing. Oh, constantly putting the emphasis on the wrong syllable. Talking about existential things, talking about things that we can't do anything about. I think a little lesson from this week's Torah portion and from Joseph. And Joseph is telling us that the most important question is not where we are, but what are we doing about it? You're worried for the continuity of our people? So do something, anything, but do. There's someone you know that's maybe not getting a Jewish education, so help them, teach them. A depressed teenager, call them up, speak to them. If you know someone who needs help, then you can do something about it. If you yourself need help, then you can do something about it. And that's what Joseph is teaching us. He's saying enough with the sighs. It's time for the action. It's time for the deed. When you do, God will do the rest. And so, looking at the portion and looking at these portions of dreams, I think, are foretelling of being in an action mode, of looking forward, of trying to find, this. Oh, I'm dreaming. People look at dreams both positive and negative, but there's a positive connotation to, oh, I'm dreaming of a better world. I don't know, if you walk in the stores this time of year, you hear a lot about dreaming. The Jews, they wrote those songs. But Joseph, who's the greatest dreamer of all time, the greatest dreamer of all time can also be the greatest realistic person of all time. Joseph's able to decipher between active and passive. We need to decipher between active and passive. And we need to take our dreams and do something about it, put them into reality, And with that, my blessing to you is, may through our dreams and through our actions and through less size and more action, may we be the light that we're looking for. And now, this coming week, we're going to celebrate Hanukkah. And Hanukkah is all about the light. And in the darkest time, and in the world full of darkness, that's our job. It's just to be the light. And may we be that. Shabbat Shalom.